democratically.
Then, head of state Abdusalami Abubakar handed over power to Olusegun Obasanjo, heralding civilian rule after several failed attempts by the country to run a democracy.
Nigerians had hoped that a government of the people, by the people, would better handle issues plaguing the country. But 20 years after, those same issues have remained. Inauguration has been concluded in 29 states and the Federal Capital Territory. It is now time to get down to work. Does President Buhari's agenda of fighting corruption, insecurity and improving the economy align with that of Nigerians? Well, joining me now is public affairs analyst and managing editor of the Avalon Daily, Ayodele Adio. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast.
Thank
welcome
you for
to
having me.
the new dispensation.
Yeah.
Now, like the question we asked, does the president's focus on fighting insecurity, working on the economy and creating jobs align with what Nigerians actually want or need?
I think you've just hit the bullseye. The president has to focus primarily on two major issues bothering the country, which is insecurity and unemployment, by that extension, poverty. If you look at the numbers, they are quite sobering. You have close to 90 million poor people in Nigeria. You have 20 million plus young people who are qualified to get jobs, who cannot find jobs. You have a little more than that who are actually underemployed. So you have, in a sense, a chaotic situation where young people cannot find decent jobs, to do. And that has fed into the insecurity that you see around the country. So whether you like it or not, while you're struggling to get foreign direct investment or to boost the confidence in the country so that even private investors can reinvest money, create more jobs, the insecurity in the country is hampering that. So until you fix the situation where people have confidence to put their monies into investments, you're going to have a vicious cycle of more monies leaving the country to better countries.
Now, the president in his interview before the inauguration talked about, said he was going to make security, that is the police, effective, and as well as the judiciary. When you are looking at effectiveness now, what do you expect in that aspect?
I mean, we can't, it's not going to be easy to reposition the police. It's because it's been beaten for so long a time. It's been poorly funded, they've been poorly trained, they've been poorly motivated over the years. And if you want to fix that, you will need a whole lot of investment in doing that in the next 4 years. However, that has to be done. I think it was Chinua Achebe that says whenever you wake up should be your morning. And we should start doing that now. We need to recruit more policemen, and not the usual way that we've recruited policemen over time. You need to recruit qualified, intelligent and brilliant people into the Nigerian police force. We need to train them to become intelligent officers. We need to also invest in them so that they are well motivated, because these individuals put their lives in the line every single day. And it's not just the police that needs fixing. You need an entire justice reform. Our entire justice system has to be reformed, and that's why I'm glad that he wants to pay attention to the judiciary so that justice is usually not delayed most times. So it's an entire systemic reform that has to be done to ensure that the average Nigerian on the streets gets justice as at when due.
All right, Ayodele Adio, thank you for your time on TVC Breakfast.
Thank you for having me.
1999 marked a new dawn for Nigerian democracy.
Well, then head of state Abdusalami Abubakar handed over power to Olusegun Obasanjo, heralding civilian rule after several failed attempts by the country to run a democracy. Nigerians had hoped that a government of the people, by the people, would better handle issues plaguing the country. But 20 years after, those same issues have remained.
Inauguration has been concluded in 29 states and the Federal Capital Territory. It is now time to get down to work. Does President Buhari's agenda of fighting corruption, insecurity and improving the economy align with that of Nigerians? That's the questions Nigerians are asking this morning. Joining me is a public affairs analyst and a journalist, managing editor of the Avalon Daily, Ayodele Adio. Ayodele, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
In the days of the pre-independence days where all the Awolowos and all the Nnamdi Azikiwes and Ahmadu Bello campaigned. They campaigned on providing basic amenities. And the Second Republic, the days of Shagari and the others, they campaigned also on basic amenities. In 1993, MK Abiola and the others campaigned on basic amenities. In the new dispensation in the Fourth Republic, 1999 to 2003 to 2007, 2011, 2015, and here, we're still talking about basic amenities. What do you think is generally wrong with the way we run leadership in this country?
I think there's a lack of vision. Nigeria has found it a bit difficult to define what its worldview is. And everything about a country stems from its worldview and its vision, what it wants to achieve in the world. And so when you talk of education, for instance, how are you going to reform an educational system in Nigeria when you do not know what you want to compete as a country? Because it's what you decide to do as a country that will inform the kind of educational system that you want. So you've had a problem with the leadership class in Nigeria that have been unable to define clearly what the vision of the country is. You talked about the Awolowos and the Zeeks. They had a clear vision, and that is why we had the first TV station in Africa. That's why you had industries, the cocoa industries and everything. You had free education, you know, that created a pathway for several people from the South and the East to be educated. The Southern had a clear vision for Northern Nigeria, and that's why you saw the progress that they made. Unfortunately now, you've had a leadership or a political class that are more concerned about winning elections than they are about pursuing a grand vision. And so we keep setting mistakes because the political class they've lost the courage to bite the bullet.
Do you think maybe the military or the military incursion into our leadership or rulership in the country, not just maybe in Nigeria, but do you think that military space dealt a blow to the continuity of development? Because some of the leaders we have now were people who worked side by side, shoulder to shoulder with the founding fathers you were talking about. They worked with them, they knew whatever the vision of Nigeria is and all of that. And we expect them to translate all of that into the prosperity and the vision that we're supposed to see.
I mean, no doubt, you know, the fact that, you know, the military truncated democracy had its effects, you know, in Nigeria and in certain ways derailed us from certain parts of development. Having said that, the military are completely out of the way. You've had 20 years of uninterrupted democracy. And what has that delivered?
Is that enough to instill a culture? Because when you're talking about a culture, a habit of doing politics and running democracy.
I think that, yes, 20 years is enough time to instill some level of discipline, some level of culture, and to achieve a certain level of results. If you look at when the Chinese Revolution started somewhere in the 1970s, by 20 years, they had already lifted 200 million people out of poverty. So 20 years is enough time for you to start to count your wins. Unfortunately for us, all we have done the last 20 years is to increase the level of poverty in the land, to increase the level of unemployment, to increase the level of insecurity. We are a lot more broke than we were 10 years ago, in a lot more debt than we are. Unfortunately, we're even creating more problems for our children yet unborn. So until the leadership, I am hoping and I'm praying and I'm urging the president, who I believe has nothing to lose in his second term, will find the courage to take the hard decisions and make the hard choices that will force our country to move ahead.
All right, he has said so. Those who called me Baba Go Slow will certainly be surprised in the next dispensation. So we'll wait to see how that surprise will come. Yeah. Thank you very much, Adele Adio, for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Right. TVC Breakfast. May 29, 1999 marked a new dawn for Nigeria democratically.
Well, then head of state Abdulsalami Abubakar handed over power to Olusegun Obasanjo, heralding civilian rule after several failed attempts. Move your feet. To run a democracy, Nigerians had hoped that a government of the people, by the people, would better handle issues plaguing the country. But 20 years after, those same issues have remained. Inauguration has been concluded in 29 states and the Federal Capital Territory. It is now time to get down to work. Does President Buhari's agenda of fighting corruption, insecurity, and improving the economy align with that of Nigerians? Joining me now is public affairs analyst and managing editor of the Avalon Daily, Ayodele Adiu. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast.
Thank you for having me.
Now, there has been several calls when it comes to the issue of insecurity, that the president should rejig the security architecture, should, look at state policing. And then there are also questions as to, is it the challenge of rejigging the architecture that would actually deal with this, or we are overwhelmed, so to speak?
I think it's clear that strategy has to change, but this time it cannot be a very linear strategy. You have to look at it from a broad view, which means it has to involve, not just police reforms. You have to look at the systemic issues that have continued to fuel insecurity. To that extent, you would also have to factor in poverty, unemployment. You also have to factor in your geopolitical reality, one of which is the fact that Nigeria is bordered in the Sahel by extremely poor countries, what you would like to even call failed states to some extent. And the fact that your borders are extremely porous, you have people moving all the way from Mali down into Nigeria, and you have some of these weapons flooding your country. So you have to look at it from that point of view and ask yourself the very tough questions. How do I protect my country in a region that is flooded by terrorism? Because you have terrorists now in Burkina Faso, in Mali, and what have you. So it is not just about improving the strength of your military and your police. You also have to improve your foreign diplomacy, with other countries. And more importantly, you would also have, there is need for a new reorientation in Nigeria. The role of the National Orientation Agency, the role of, the media in Nigeria would have to be stepped up. There has to be some level of social reengineering, and the media has to lead the front. And of course, that's why I said that the National Orientation Agency has a big role to play, because you need to win hearts and minds, and you need to redirect the consciousness of the people towards
now, another aspect that Nigerians have called the president to look into is the aspect of unemployment. And before the inauguration, the government has talked about creating about 20 million jobs, and is looking at areas like agriculture, transportation, construction, as well as services, as those areas would drive the economy. Do you think that these are the areas we should be concentrating on?
Well, first of all, I'm not, I think 20 million jobs is overly ambitious, but I agree that, construction presents a huge opportunity. From the last figures that we all quote, which is 2012 figures of the 17 million housing deficits we have in Nigeria, for instance. Imagine if there's a huge construction, to bridge that housing deficit alone in Nigeria, it creates a huge amount of jobs for Nigerians across the country. And talking about agriculture, it is my assumption that there needs to be a little shift away from subsistence farming into targeting the larger value chains that has to do with processing. Because the moment we begin to invest in a lot of processing, we can improve the wages of these farmers. We can also get, decent paying jobs will be created by setting up these processing factories everywhere. So agriculture, of course, presents a huge opportunity, but then the attention has to move away, from subsistence farming towards more mechanized farming. We also need to look at agricultural clusters, where in certain regions in the country have some level of comparative advantages with the crops that they produce, with the cash crops that they produce, and see how 4, 5, 10 communities can pool resources together and have some tractors moving to those places, and so there can be shared benefits for those communities. So I think that if we look closely, at that value chain in agriculture, and we look at construction and real estate, we should be able to create a meaningful amount of jobs. Of course, we'd also need to make very hard choices in terms of monetary policy, whether we want to, continue pursuing a contractionary, monetary policy, or we want to pursue an expansionary monetary policy. So there are hard choices to make. Each of them have their own consequences, short and long term. But I think we must prioritize growth and employment opportunities.
But for some Nigerians, the aspect of transportation is the state of the roads in most parts of the country. How successful will that be when the states of the road are what it is?
Yeah, I mean, infrastructural development is also key. There's no doubt about it. But you see, again, the country, the government will also have to find the courage. A lot of political will and courage has to be, you see, over time, what we have done in terms of road infrastructure is to say, okay, we have 100 billion, for instance. Okay, we want to do Lagos-Ibadan. We have to do Kano-Meduguri. We have to do the second Niger. We have to do... By the time you spread these monies around, you're only going to achieve 2 kilometers in each region. So we need to prioritize the roads that connects markets together and that is going to boost investment and get them sorted.
We have to leave it at this point. Ayodele Adio, thank you for your time on TVC Breakfast.
Thank you for having me.